My wife Cheryl and I own a farm in Buckingham, Iowa, where we mainly grow corn. This was in August of 2018 on a slightly rainy night. Cheryl and I have both spent our entire lives in the farm life. It's really all we know. Of course, farm life in Iowa means lots of space and very few people. Our closest neighbors. George and Kenny were each about half a mile away in opposite directions, also farmers with not much else going on around here. It's easy to become friends with your neighbors. We often have George and Kenny and their wives over and vice versa on this one. Otherwise, normal weekend night, we had George and his wife over for drinks. We all got pretty drunk while playing board games. They left around 11. Luckily, it's a 30-second straight line of a drive home. We continued to drink some wine as we watched one of our favorite movies. We were starting to get tired. We were definitely feeling the effects of the wine. We were most likely just going to fall asleep on the couch, cuddled up together when there was a knock at the front door. A knock at the door at this hour was unusual. In fact, it never happened before, but accompanied with the knocks, we thought we could hear a voice say something. I lowered the volume of the TV. We waited for it to happen again, like 20 seconds later. Another set of knocks at the door followed by a muffled voice saying, "We need help." I was about to get up and open the door when Cheryl shook my arm and I looked at her, and she made a face and shook her head. "Number," I whispered. "I'm just going to ask who it is," she replied. I shouldn't let them know we're home, but odds are they already knew we were home. I went over to the door and asked, "Who is it?" The voice on the other side said, through the door. "Oh, thank God, can you open up?" "We're lost," I said. "Who's we?" And the voice said back, "My wife and I." I replied, "Can your wife say something?" There was a silence for a few seconds. I followed it up with, "Did you hear me?" The same voice said back, "Yeah, but she's not next to me right now." This is where red flags started going off in my head, and I started to realize the voice sounded a little off, like a man trying to make his voice sound a little higher. I laughed and said, "George, is that you?" George is a big goof, and him being drunk, it wouldn't be unheard of for him to do something like this. The voice said back, "Yeah," in a slightly deeper voice. Now I almost felt relief, believing that it was actually George. But I didn't want to open the door just yet before confirming having someone knock on your door out here late at night, claiming to be lost, doesn't happen. It's not a thing, and it's an immediate cause for alarm. I said through the door, "Prove it. What's your wife's name?" A now unfamiliar voice said back, "That's a trick question." My smile disappeared. I went to get my phone and called George. Cheryl was watching the whole thing, telling me we should call the police. I said, "Hold on." The phone rang like 3 times before George picked up right away. I said, "Are you at my front door right now?" And he said, "No, why?" I told him there's someone at our front door trying to trick me into opening it. He said he'll hurry right over, and we hung up, keep in mind. All of us were still drunk during this. There were knocks again at the door. I yelled, "I have a shotgun waiting for you if you don't leave here now." The voice said back, "We're just trying to use a phone. That's all we need." Charles called 911, which out here it takes an extremely long time for an officer to arrive on scene. We heard footsteps walking around our wooden deck that wraps around the house, a couple sets of footsteps. Actually, they stopped at one of our windows, which had the blinds closed, and we heard one of them attempting to lift the window open. This caused Cheryl, who was still on the phone with 911, to scream, "Leave us alone." I followed suit and screamed at the top of my lungs to get the phew out of here or I'll shoot you. It took me that long to think to run upstairs to grab my shotgun from the closet. Literally, a few seconds later, there were more pounds at the door, and this time it was actually George's voice yawling, "Open up." I let George in, who also brought his shotgun. He said he didn't see anything or anyone as he pulled up. He stayed with us until a police officer came to the house. He did a quick little scan of the property with us, then left. We took heed of his advice in installing a camera on the front and back. Surprisingly, something we never thought of until this incident still gives me chills, that all that was keeping out whoever was on our front deck that night was a wooden door. Alone on the farm. It was the summer of 2018, and I was spending a few nights at my grandparents' farm while they were away. On the last night, everything changed. I was in the living room, engrossed in TV, when I heard a strange noise outside, coming from the cornfield. At first, I brushed it off, probably just a deer, but then every cow started mooing loudly in unison. That was unusual. Typically, one or two might moo at a time, but this was chaotic. Something had scared them. As the only person on the farm, it was my responsibility to check it out. I grabbed my coat and was heading outside when a high-pitched cow scream cut through the air. I froze, heart pounding. I'd never heard anything like it before. Shaking, I ran upstairs to my grandpa's room and pulled out his hunting rifle from under the bed. Fully armed, I stepped outside into the cool night air. The cows were still frantic. I went to the barn to investigate. At first glance, everything seemed normal, until I realized one cow was missing from its stall. I was certain it had been tied up earlier. Then I heard it again, the eerie, high-pitched moo, this time coming from the cornfield. My unease deepened when I thought I could hear faint voices. It sounded like people talking, though I couldn't make out the words. Fear turned to anger. I fired 2 shots into the air, hoping to scare off whoever was out there. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, everything was still until the footsteps began. The sound of multiple footsteps crunching through the cornfield filled the air. I hesitated but knew I couldn't ignore it. Gun in hand, I stepped into the tall rows of corn. With each step, I could hear movement all around me, as if I were surrounded. Then, a chilling sight stopped me in my tracks. A figure, dressed in black, stood a few feet ahead. I raised my gun, yelling for them to leave. The figure didn't move. I fired another warning shot into the sky, but they remained still. Then, they started walking toward me. Their arms were slightly outstretched, as if they were telling me to lower my weapon. My grip tightened on the rifle, and I screamed at them to stop. That's when I realized the full scope of the situation. There weren't just 1 or 2 figures. There were at least 6 or 7, all dressed in black, scattered throughout the field. Each wore a mask, their blank expressions hidden behind unsettling designs. My breath caught as panic set in. The figure closest to me stopped, and for a moment all of them stood still. Then they began chanting. The sound was low and rhythmic, almost like a song but in a language I couldn't understand. It was haunting. My mind raced as I considered what they might do next. Were they about to perform some ritual? Were they after me? Summoning every ounce of courage, I turned and bolted, sprinting through the rows of corn. When I felt I'd put enough distance between us, I stopped and fired 6 rounds in their direction. The sound of rustling crops and retreating footsteps told me they were scattering. Relieved, but still terrified, I ran back toward the farmhouse. As I reached the edge of the field, something on the ground caught my eye. What I saw made me gag. A cow's head, lying in the dirt, surrounded by a circle of candles. My stomach churned, and I stumbled back to the house, barely making it to the bathroom before throwing up. Shaking uncontrollably, I called the police. I explained everything as best as I could to the operator, who assured me that an officer was on the way. Then I called my parents, begging them to come get me. My dad said he'd be there in an hour. Until then, I locked myself in my grandpa's room, clutching the rifle and jumping at every creak and shadow. When the police arrived, I ran outside, overwhelmed with relief. I recounted the night's events, and the officer began searching the property. In the barn, he found the mutilated cow's head, confirming my worst fears. It was now an active crime scene. A search team was called in, but the mysterious figures were long gone. My parents arrived shortly after. I broke down as I explained what happened to them and the officer. That night, I went home, too shaken to return to the farm. My grandparents later installed security cameras all over the property. To this day, we don't know who those people were or why they chose that night to perform their ritual. But the memory of those masked figures in the cornfield and the macabre scene they left behind still haunts me. My name is Nimra. I'm 25 years old and I live on my family's farm. I help take care of it when my parents are out of town. It's just a little family farm, not a commercial farm or anything like that. My parents want me to take it over when they're too old to take care of it anymore, as I'm the oldest of 3 and the only son, but honestly, I don't really want to. I don't see myself staying in the middle of Arkansas my whole life, and especially not after something really weird. That happened only last July. My parents were on a romantic trip for a week, and so it was my 2 sisters, Crystal and Morgan, and I taking care of the property while they were gone. There's not much around here, lots of privacy, and such a little too much in my opinion. Except for this one night, it started later on in the night as it was approaching time to go to bed. My sisters do college online. Crystal takes summer courses, and so she was in her room on her laptop doing work. Morgan and I were just hanging out watching some dumb show in the living room. All 3 of us kinda want to get out of the farm lifestyle. Me, especially since I'm oldest and in the prime of my 20s. One dreaded part of farm life is the predators, though not just the animals that come and eat your produce, but the people that come and steal from you, believe it or not. It happens. It hasn't happened many times to us, but it does happen. We have a few guns in the house. For this exact reason, our 2 dogs outside suddenly started going crazy in the backyard. Something spooked them for sure. I first thing went outside to the yard to see what they were barking at. They both were looking in the direction of the crops, going crazy. I yelled at them to shut up, and they went quiet. I stepped right in front of the crops and listened. I heard a whistling from inside of the cornfield. It was undoubtedly a human's whistling. This was the first time I was experiencing a trespasser on the property with my dad not here. I had to hurry inside to get one of the guns. The dog started barking again. I told my sisters that someone's outside in the cornfield and I had to go chase them away. They both said that was a terrible idea to go run into the cornfield in the dark, and they knocked some sense into me when I realized they were right. I also realized how downright terrifying that would be. So instead, I went out back to the dogs once more, going crazy, barking in the direction of the crops. I aimed the gun into the air and fired off a shot, which echoed into the night, silencing the dogs. I also was on some kind of power trip in the moment and screamed out to get off our land as loud as I could. I felt that would have done the trick and went back inside. My sisters were both laughing, which caused me to laugh too. But our little laugh amongst each other didn't last long because the dog started going crazy again, even crazier. This time, I went back outside ready to do the same thing again, but I felt my heart skip a beat. When I saw the guy standing about 20 feet from the dogs right in front of the cornfield, He looked at me and I screamed, "Hey!" At which point he ran into the cornfield. I started running over and fired another shot into the air. I stopped by the dogs. There was no chance in hell I was going in there. I wasn't about to leave the dogs out here either. I unclamped their chains from the hooks and brought them inside the house. I told my sister someone was sneaking around in the cornfield, so what did we do? We called our dad. He told me I had to be the man of the house and protect my sisters. He recommended I fire another warning shot outside if whoever it was came back. After this, we all just gradually went to our respective rooms. My sisters each brought one of the dogs in their rooms, and I brought the gun in my room, just because we were all a little spooked by this. I had the window open, and as I was laying in bed watching a movie on my laptop, I heard it whistling from outside. I hurried to the window and looked out to see someone slowly walking in the grass. Then, like he had some sixth sense, he stopped walking and turned to look at my window, still whistling. This jerk was obviously trying to mess with us and scare us a very stupid idea, when I already made it clear I had a gun. I ran to grab the gun off the bed and aimed it out the window. I shot at the grass a few feet away from him, purposely missing. Of course, this cut his little horror movie act short, and he ran out of view of my window towards the front of the house. This time, he didn't come back. He'd have to be a fool to come back after that. I obviously told my sisters why I shot, and I assured them he would not be coming back. We never found out who it was or why. It could have been some teen or multiple teens just trying to scare some innocent farmers for fun. Or it could have been an actually dangerous person,